So over the last month or so, I've bought 20 brand new albums, and I have to say, with a few exceptions, I was bitterly disappointed in the quality of the albums. Not only from the perspective that they arrived, some of them quite grubby. Most had pops and clicks on them. I had to return one because it was incredibly badly warped. Most had minor warping, but again, not bad enough to affect the playing. But in the whole, with the exception of 2 LPs, I was rather disappointed with all of them, which is why I decided to do this video and say this is one of the reasons why I listen to mainly older albums. And here I've got a selection of albums. These are my sort of 15 or 16 go-to albums, which I always pull out when I want to just listen to something that I know is going to be good and fulfilling. The newest album amongst this selection is 37 years old, and the oldest one, or the oldest ones, are over 50 years old, and without exception, many of the pressings here still sound better than some of the modern pressings I've recently received. Let's take, for instance, I ordered a Colin Blunstone compilation. Now, it's a double audiophile limited edition 180 gram vinyl. One thing I will say is, don't buy 180 grams because you think it's better than thinner vinyl. It's no better really, and in fact it can be a lot worse. Anyway, I've got the original recording of the Zombies with Colin Blunstone singing She's Not There. I was quite interested to get this new version. It happened to be on white vinyl, and I've already expressed my opinion that coloured vinyl is inherently worse than black vinyl. So I put it on, and I immediately felt that I needed to get up and clean my stylus. There was an edginess in the background. The vocals weren't resolving quite as nicely as I knew they should be. I got out the old Zombies record, which is, as I say, getting on for 50 years old, or maybe even older. And it sounded far better. And that to me was one of the reasons why I'm probably still listening to old albums and old music rather than bothering with the newer stuff. I got a 50-year anniversary of Tina Turner's first solo album after she split with Ike Turner. And this is actually a country album, so it's quite unusual. But this is a half-speed master. It was apparently cut on a brand new refurbished lathe. It was done from high-quality master tapes, and comparing it with the original 50-year-old record, they managed to make it sound much worse, with vocals being sometimes recessed, sometimes too high in the mix. The bass was phenomenally loud in places, completely over-swamping or overemphasized compared with the rest of the music being played. a complete waste of time, really. However, I will say it was a pressing which was absolutely flat and one of the few that didn't have any pops and clicks on it. But all that said, let's talk about my go-to albums. There is one album which I probably rate more highly than most other albums that have been released in the last 50 years, and that's Steely Dan's Asia. This album is phenomenal. It has probably had more playing time than any other album I've got. Is that all right? Can you see that? Or is that going to be too shiny? I hate to have to take them out of all the covers. But a phenomenal album. The playing is superb on it. Musicianship is extremely good. There's not a bad song on the whole of the album. Up until this point, I've always liked Steely Dan, but I've always found there were some exceptional songs on the albums before this, and some okay songs on there. No bad songs, but this one, Asia, every single song is a good song. So that is probably the album I play the most. Joni Mitchell, Wild Things Run Fast. Again, been a fan of Joni Mitchell for many, many years, but this again is what I consider to be her best album. Now, this is from my perspective. Lots of people won't agree with that. They'll go for Shadows in Light or Hitting of the Summer Lawns. I mean, I've got all those as well, but this is the Joni Mitchell album that I always go for. Now, that's 43 years old, that album. Now, an album that got caught in the flood I mentioned some time ago. So this is just been re-sleeved. This is Joe Cocker's Sheffield Steel. Recorded in Jamaica. Phenomenal musicianship. Phenomenal songs. It's got Sly and Robbie on it. Production is wonderful. And again, not a single bad track. This is played an awful lot by me. An album I've got 3 copies of. This is a Nimbus Supercut. I have the original non-Supercut one, and as soon as they announced, or this was bought from Practical Hi-Fi, where they commissioned some albums to be produced by Nimbus, and this was an absolute must-have for me. It is one of those rare albums which just gets better and better as your system gets better and better, to the extent that on a mediocre system it sounds a bit like elevator music, but on the right system it is phenomenal. There's so much to discover on this album. It's got to be the most live sounding studio album that I've ever heard. It is phenomenal. I'm using that word a lot, aren't I? I'm a big fan of Yes, but their best album, Close to the Edge, by a country mile, as far as I'm concerned. This is, if I had to pick one single Yes album, this would be the one. It is wonderful. Again, 53 years old, and played quite a lot. Crusader Street Life, again, another album that got caught in the flood, so has been rehoused, as it were. I did used to have them in these, which were DJ sleeves, because when the flood happened, you couldn't buy these plain covers. And the only thing I've discovered is that whilst I've been cataloguing my record collection recently, I've discovered some gems I wasn't even aware I had, and that's because these just disappear in between the regular album sleeves. Hence the reason I'm going to start using these 3mm spine ones, which I can actually get the album name on the back. Crusader Street Life, 46 years old now. Joan Baez, Diamonds and Rust. Now, these songs are wonderful. This was in the period where Joan Baez was recording songs by John Prine, Bob Dylan, and there are some great songs on here. One of the standout songs is a song called Dida, which has Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez singing a duet, and again, just superb. A complete step change now. 53 years old today, or, well, not today, but 53 years old anyway. Uriah Heep's Demons and Wizards. Probably my first prog rock, I don't know how you classify it, albums. But a great album, lyrically great, good stories, and an enjoyable album to listen to. The first Van Morrison album I ever bought, A Period of Transition. I was watching Bob Harris on the Old Grey Whistle Test, and he introduced Van Morrison and his band playing the Eternal Kansas City live, and I was just blown away by the song, the lyrical content, the production, the choir in the background. And I didn't know anything about Van Morrison at the time. I went down to my local Virgin record store. Do they have Virgin record stores anymore? I don't suppose they do. And had to go through all the Van Morrison records until I found what album it was on. Remember, this was pre-internet, or at least pre-internet for those of us who couldn't actually afford it. And this put me on a path of exploring Van Morrison's body of work, and I've probably got about 30 Van Morrison albums since, but this was the first, and to my mind there is only one Van Morrison album which betters this, and that is, I haven't got it on LP, I've only got it on a CD, and that is Poetic Champions Compose. Lyrically beautiful, the musicianship is absolutely stunning, all the songs are great, and there are some beautiful songs on there. Queen of the Slipstream, I Forgot That Love Existed, Someone Like You. Wonderful. Something, again, slightly different from the other albums so far. This is the Pat Metheny group, and this is Off Ramp. It's categorised as jazz, obviously, but anything on the ECM label is usually categorised as jazz. Beautifully played music, beautifully produced, and this pressing which is 43 years old, is still pristine, and I play it all the time, and I always am amazed at the sheer quality of the pressing. On a similar theme, Lyle Mays' album Street Dreams, a truly wonderful set of musicians on this. This is probably one of the most dynamic albums I've got. You can turn the stereo up and this can really shock you at times with the dynamic range that comes out. Just wonderful. The last album I've got on my selection is a Chaka Khan album, and this is What You're Gonna Do For Me. I bought this for one specific track, which was And the Melody Still Lingers On, which was a adaptation of A Night in Tunisia, an old jazz standard. Again, 44 years ago I bought this. I'm still playing it, and this is the best Chaka Khan album that's ever been released. Well worth looking out. A couple of CDs now that I always pick up and play. Alan Holdsworth, Metal Fatigue. Now, Alan Holdsworth is perhaps the guitarist's guitarist. A friend of mine went to see him live and said it was the most frightening experience he's ever had. He's a guitarist himself and quite an accomplished guitarist, but he was just awestruck by the man's accomplishments on the guitar. Again, slightly unusual, but well worth seeking out. And now in the more straightforward jazz vein, Freddie Hubbard and Woody Shaw, The Eternal Triangle. This is as hard bop as you can probably get. It just drives from track to track to track, and it is, without question, one of my favourite jazz albums. And, you know, I've got everything from Miles Davis to, well, I've got a large selection of jazz, but this is the one that is a standout album for me. So that's a little selection of the albums I play, mostly. They're the ones I tend to gravitate to when I just pull something out to play and I'm not particularly interested in hunting through my collection. So the oldest one there is 53 years old, and the youngest album there is 37 years old. The 37 years old one is Street Dreams by Lyle Mays. So the oldest albums there are the Demons and Wizards by Uriah Heep. That's 53 years old now. And what was the other one? Close to the Edge. by Yes, which is also 53 years old. I do buy more modern music. I have bought, as I say, quite a few recently, and with the exception of some of the more modern jazz pressings, as I say, I've been bitterly disappointed, and I think it's now time to call a moratorium on my LP buying, and I think I'm going to stick with buying CDs. As I said in the past, I don't think buying vinyl these days is a viable option. I think it's vastly overpriced. I think the quality is in the main too low to warrant the effort in playing a record. Most of these old pressings I've got sound better than modern pressings. And there isn't any way that if I was starting from scratch now, if we had a fire in the house and I lost all my LPs, I wouldn't replace them with new vinyl. It would be a pointless exercise. I wouldn't replace them with old copies, because buying old mint 50-year-old vinyl is hideously expensive, more expensive than buying new vinyl, if you can indeed source any mint or near mint copies. I will say that when I had the flood in the house that resulted in me having a load of album covers ruined, most of the LPs were fine in themselves, but I had about 200 LPs where the covers were a complete write-off. They were basically papier-mâché. They stuck together completely, couldn't be saved at all. And as I've shown you, I ended up putting them into these DJ sleeves with a normal sleeve just put inside, and that was all I could do at the time to save them. I was insured, and the insurance at the time paid me based on the albums that were damaged, and that includes some where the album was not completely damaged. Have I got any here? Oh, that's no point. Where it had some water staining, but the album cover was still reasonably okay. It could still function as an album cover, but it had bad water staining, and as it dried out, the surface became badly rippled, and so on. But the settlement at the time, and remember this was just over 20 years ago, was £9,000 for the albums that got ruined. And if you put that figure into a inflation calculator, that comes out to around 50 grand now. So, you know, I was reasonably well pleased with the settlement. I still had all the albums I could play. I bought a record cleaning machine, as I said, to ensure there was no debris left on the LPs themselves before I re-sleeved them. And I think I only had 2 or 3 albums which were completely unrecoverable because I hadn't put them in a polyline sleeve at the time, and the paper sleeve had got so ingrained into the vinyl that it couldn't be cleaned out. And as I say, what I'm doing now is I'm going to go through those 200 odd albums like this and put them into plain card covers. Now, I was, as I say, doing this thing where I'd have a printer front and a back and a spine down there, so I could then glue it and fold it over. But that's basically a real pain. So all I'm going to do going forward is create a strip to go down the back and glue that on, and probably a track listing on the back side. And that's going to be what I'm going to be doing for the next few months, because say I've got 200 odd to do.